The emergency signal came from nowhere, cutting through the silence of deep space like a knife through cloth. Lisa Reynolds had been reviewing supply reports when the sharp beeping filled the bridge of the Pioneer's Edge. Her coffee went cold as she stared at the readings on her screen. "Ben, get up here," she called to her medic through the ship's communication system. "We have a problem." Dr. Ben Carter arrived within minutes, still wearing his medical gloves from treating a crew member's minor burn. Behind him came Alex Park, the ship's engineer whose clothes were stained with engine oil. Maria Santos, their security officer, followed close behind with her weapon belt still fastened around her waist. "What kind of signal are we looking at?" Ben asked as he studied the data streaming across the main display. Lisa pointed to the screen, where strange patterns of light pulsed in steady waves. "It's not like anything in our databases. The source is coming from Zerion 7, that dead planet we passed 3 days ago. But here's the weird part. The signal only started broadcasting after we left the system." Alex wiped his hands on a dirty cloth and moved closer to examine the readings. "The power source is weak. Whatever is sending this message doesn't have much energy left." Maria crossed her arms and frowned. "Could be a trap. Pirates sometimes use fake distress calls to lure ships into ambushes." "In the middle of nowhere?" Lisa shook her head. "We're 2 weeks from the nearest trading route. No pirate would waste time here." The signal continued its strange pattern, rising and falling like the sound of something crying for help. Ben noticed something odd about the frequency. "Lisa, can you adjust the audio filters? This almost sounds like..." She made the changes, and suddenly the bridge filled with a new sound. It was definitely crying, but not human. The voice was small, frightened, and desperately calling for help. "That's a living creature," Ben said firmly. "Something young by the sound of it." Lisa looked at her crew. They were explorers, not rescue workers, but none of them could ignore the obvious distress in that signal. "How long to get back to Zerion 7? 6 hours if we push the engines," Alex replied. "But I should warn you, we're already behind schedule for our next supply stop. We'll worry about that later." Lisa turned to Maria. "What's our weapon status?" "All systems ready, but I still think this could be dangerous. We don't know what we're walking into." Despite the warnings, Lisa made her decision. The crying continued from the speakers, growing weaker with each passing minute. Whatever was down there wouldn't survive much longer without help. The journey back to Zerion 7 felt longer than it should have. The planet looked exactly as they remembered, a brown and gray world with no signs of life on the surface. Ancient ruins dotted the landscape, left behind by some long-dead civilization. Most of the structures had crumbled into dust, but a few, crystalline towers still stood like forgotten monuments. "The signal is coming from the northern continent," Alex reported as they entered orbit. "Near those crystal formations we scanned before." Lisa studied the surface through their cameras. "I don't see anything moving down there. Are you sure the signal is still active?" "Getting weaker by the hour," Ben confirmed. "Whatever it is, we need to hurry." They took the shuttle down to the planet's surface, landing near a cluster of tall, crystal spires that sparkled in the alien sun. The structures were beautiful but clearly very old. Cracks ran through most of them, and several had fallen over, leaving behind piles of glittering debris. The crying sound was much clearer now, coming from somewhere beneath a collapsed tower. Maria led the way with her scanner active, checking for any signs of danger. Ben carried his medical kit, ready to help whatever they found. Alex brought tools for moving heavy objects, and Lisa coordinated their search. "Over here," Maria called from behind a large pile of crystal fragments. "The signal is strongest in this area." They began carefully moving pieces of debris, being careful not to cause more collapses. The crystal was lighter than it looked, but still dangerous with its sharp edges. After 30 minutes of work, they heard the crying much more clearly. "There," Ben pointed to a small gap between two large crystal chunks. "I can see something moving." Lisa knelt down and looked through the opening. What she saw made her gasp, in amazement. A small creature with scales that changed colors like oil on water was trapped beneath a crystal beam. It was no bigger than a house cat, with wings folded against its sides and large eyes that looked directly at her. "It's some kind of dragon," she whispered. The creature's scales shifted from dull gray to bright blue when it saw her. It made soft, chirping sounds and tried to move, but the crystal beam held one of its legs pinned to the ground. "Is it injured?" Ben asked, already preparing his medical scanner. "Looks like it. The leg might be broken." Lisa reached carefully through the gap, speaking in gentle tones. "Easy there, little one. We're here to help." The dragon stopped struggling and tilted, its head as if it understood her words. Its scales brightened to warm gold, and it made softer sounds that almost seemed like purring. Alex studied the fallen crystal beam. "I can lift this, but we need to be ready to pull the creature out quickly. If more debris falls, we might not get another chance." Ben positioned himself near the gap with his medical kit ready. Maria kept watch for any signs of danger. Lisa reached in as far as she could, ready to grab the dragon the moment it was free. "On 3, Alex said, gripping the crystal beam. 1, 2, 3. He lifted with all his strength, and the beam rose just enough to free the trapped leg. Lisa quickly but gently pulled the dragon out from under the debris. The creature weighed almost nothing and felt warm in her hands. The dragon looked up at her with intelligent eyes and made a soft, trilling sound. Its scales had turned to bright silver, and despite its obvious pain, it seemed to understand that it was now safe. Ben immediately began examining the injured leg with his scanner. Hairline fracture, but nothing that won't heal. The real problem is dehydration and exhaustion. This little one has been trapped for days, maybe weeks. As he worked to treat the dragon's injuries, the creature remained calm and cooperative. It even seemed to help by holding its leg still while Ben applied a temporary brace. "I've never seen anything like this," Lisa said, gently stroking the dragon's head. "The intelligence in those eyes is remarkable." The dragon responded by nuzzling her hand and making happy chirping sounds. Its scales rippled through shades of warm blue and gold, clearly expressing contentment and gratitude. "We should get back to the ship," Maria suggested, still scanning the area nervously. "Something about this place doesn't feel right." As if responding to her words, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate slightly. It was so faint they almost missed it. But the dragon noticed immediately. Its scales shifted to deep red, and it began making urgent chittering sounds. "What's wrong with it?" Alex asked, noticing the sudden change in behavior. Ben checked his scanner again. Heart rate just doubled. It's definitely agitated about something. The vibration grew stronger, and small pieces of crystal began falling from the remaining towers. The dragon struggled in Lisa's arms, trying to look down at the ground beneath them. "We need to leave. Now." Lisa stood up quickly, holding the dragon close to her chest. They ran back to their shuttle as the ground continued to shake. Behind them, more crystal towers began to crack and fall. The dragon's cries grew more desperate, and its scales flashed between red and black like a warning signal. As their shuttle lifted off from the surface, Lisa looked back at the crystal formation where they had found the dragon. The shaking had stopped, but something felt wrong. The area looked different somehow, as if the ground itself had shifted. "Ben, how is our patient doing?" she asked as they climbed toward orbit. The dragon had calmed down once they left the planet's surface, though its scales still showed hints of worried orange. "Better now. I think it just didn't like being near those crystals." But Lisa wasn't convinced it was that simple. In her arms, the small dragon continued to look back at the planet below, making soft sounds that seemed almost like warnings. Its eyes held an intelligence that suggested it knew something they didn't. As the Pioneer's Edge received them back into its cargo bay, none of them realized they had just made a discovery that would change everything. The baby dragon wasn't just any creature. It was something far more important than they could imagine. And deep beneath Zarian 7's surface, their rescue had awakened something that had been sleeping for millions of years. The first sign something was wrong came 12 hours after they had rescued the dragon. Alex was running routine maintenance checks on the ship's sensors when every alarm on his console started screaming at once. "Lisa, you need to see this," he called over the ship's communication system, his voice tight with worry. She arrived in the sensor room to find Alex staring at readings that made no sense. According to their instruments, something massive was moving beneath Xerion 7's surface. The object appeared to be climbing upward through solid rock and metal as if they weren't even there. "How big are we talking?" Lisa asked, studying the impossible data. "Bigger than our ship. Bigger than the space station at Proxima Colony. Maybe bigger than the colony itself." Alex ran the scans again, hoping for an error. "And it's picking up speed." In the medical bay, Ben was having his own problems with their rescued dragon. The small creature had been calm and friendly for hours, even playful as it recovered from its injuries. But now it paced frantically around its temporary enclosure, its scales flashing rapid patterns of red and black. "Easy there, little one," Ben said softly, trying to calm the agitated creature. "You're safe now." But the dragon wasn't acting like it felt safe. It kept looking toward the walls of the ship as if it could see right through them to the planet below. Its chirping had changed from contented sounds to urgent, rapid calls that seemed almost like speech. Maria arrived at the medical bay just as the dragon began throwing itself against the walls of its enclosure. "What's gotten into it?" "I don't know. It started acting like this about 20 minutes ago, right around the time Alex detected those readings from the planet." The dragon stopped its frantic movement and looked directly at Maria. For a moment, its scales shifted to a complex pattern of blue, gold, and silver. Then it made a series of sounds that were clearly different from its earlier calls. "Almost. Sounds like it's trying to tell us something," Maria observed. Ben nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. This creature is definitely intelligent, maybe more than we realized." The ship's communication system crackled to life. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." When they gathered on the bridge, Lisa was already studying the main display screen. The view showed Xerion 7 from their current orbit, but something had changed. The crystal formations where they had found the dragon were glowing with a faint light that pulsed in steady rhythms. "The glowing started an hour ago," Lisa explained. "At first we thought it was just reflected sunlight, but it's getting brighter." Alex pulled up his sensor data on the main screen. Whatever is moving underground, it's now less than a mile from the surface, and the movement is centered directly beneath the crystal formations. Ben carried the dragon onto the bridge, hoping its presence might help them understand what was happening. The moment the creature saw the image of Xerion 7, it became even more agitated. Its scales turned deep black with red edges, and it made sharp, urgent sounds. "It definitely recognizes the planet," Ben said. "And it's clearly upset about something." Maria studied the dragon's behavior carefully. As a security officer, she was trained to read body language and behavioral patterns. "Look at how it keeps trying to get closer to the screen. It's not afraid of the planet, it's worried about it." "Worried about what?" Lisa asked. The dragon made more complex sounds, and its scales began displaying rapid patterns of color. The patterns were too fast and complex to be random. There was definitely intelligence behind them. "Alex, can you run those scale patterns through the translation computer?" Lisa suggested. "Already trying, but we don't have any reference data for this species. It could take hours to figure out even basic meanings." As if responding to their conversation, the dragon suddenly became very still. Its scales slowly shifted to pure white, then began displaying a new pattern. Slower this time, more deliberate. The colors moved across its body in waves, from head to tail, repeating the same sequence over and over. "It's trying to teach us," Ben realized. "Look, the same pattern keeps repeating. It wants us to understand." They watched as the dragon continued its patient display, but before they could make progress with translation, their sensors detected something new. The object beneath Xerion 7's surface had suddenly accelerated, rising through the final layers of rock and soil like a bullet through paper. "Contact in 30 seconds, Alex reported, his voice tight with tension. The main screen switched to a direct view of the crystal formations. The glow had become so bright it was difficult to look at directly. Then, without warning, the ground began to crack and split. What emerged from beneath the planet's surface defied everything they thought they knew about the universe. At first, it looked like a massive tentacle, black as the space between stars and easily as wide as a city block. But as more of it appeared, they realized they were looking at something far larger and more terrifying. "How long is that thing?" Maria whispered. More tentacles burst through the surface, each one enormous beyond comprehension. The crystalline formations that had stood for thousands of years crumbled like sandcastles as the creature continued to emerge. But the most disturbing thing about the tentacles was their surface. Instead of reflecting light like normal matter, they seemed to absorb it completely, creating patches of absolute darkness against the planet's surface. The dragon in Ben's arms had gone completely still, its scales now pure black, except for tiny points of silver light that moved across its body like stars. Its eyes were fixed on the screen, and it made soft, mournful sounds that seemed to carry infinite sadness. "We need to get out of here," Maria said firmly. "Whatever that thing is, we don't want to be anywhere near it when it finishes emerging." But Lisa hesitated. Something about the dragon's behavior told her they couldn't simply run away. "Alex, what are our long-range sensors showing?" He checked his instruments and his face went pale. "The gravity readings are off the charts. That thing is so massive it's actually affecting the planet's orbit. And there's something else. The space around it is behaving strangely. Light isn't traveling in straight lines anymore." As they watched, more tentacles emerged from the planet. Each one was miles long and moved with a fluid grace that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The creature seemed to be testing, its limbs stretching after what must have been an incredibly long sleep. The dragon suddenly struggled in Ben's arms and managed to reach the communication console. It pressed several buttons with its small claws, and the ship's external speakers activated. To everyone's amazement, the dragon began making sounds that were clearly directed at the creature on the planet below. The response was immediate and horrifying. All the tentacles stopped moving and turned toward their ship, as if the massive entity had suddenly become aware of their presence. The patches of darkness on the tentacles seemed to grow larger, and space around Zirion 7 began to distort visibly. "It's looking at us," Maria said in a voice barely above a whisper. The dragon's calls became more urgent, almost desperate. Its scales flickered between black and silver so rapidly they created a strobing effect. It was clearly trying to communicate with the massive entity, but the conversation wasn't going well. "Can anyone else feel that?" Ben asked suddenly. "Like something is pressing on the inside of my skull?" They all felt it, a strange pressure that seemed to be coming from outside their ship. It wasn't physical, but rather something that touched their minds directly. Images began flashing through their thoughts, vast emptiness, stars going out one by one, and a hunger so deep it could never be satisfied. The dragon made one final piercing call and then collapsed in Ben's arms, its scales fading to dull gray. The effort of whatever it had been trying to do had exhausted the small creature completely. On the screen, the massive entity began to respond to the dragon's communication. The tentacles started moving in complex patterns, and the distortions in space grew stronger. But something was wrong. The patterns weren't the same as the dragon's. Where the dragon's movements had been graceful and purposeful, the entity's responses seemed confused and angry. "It's not listening," Lisa realized. The dragon was trying to tell it something, but it's not responding the way it should. Alex checked his sensors again. "Whatever that thing is, it's still rising. We're looking at maybe 10% of its total mass so far." The thought of something 10 times larger than what they could already see was terrifying beyond words. The tentacles they could observe were already large enough to crush their ship without effort, and if Alex was right, there was far more creature still hidden beneath the surface. Maria moved to the weapons console. Though she knew their ship's defensive systems would be useless against something so massive. "How long before we can jump to faster-than-light travel?" 20 minutes for the engines to charge, Alex replied. "But I'm not sure we should leave. Look at the dragon." The small creature had revived slightly and was staring at the screen with obvious distress. Its scales showed a complex pattern of colors that somehow conveyed deep sadness and fear. Not fear for itself, but fear for something much larger. "It knows what that thing is," Ben said quietly, "and it's terrified of what will happen if it gets free." As if to confirm his words, the dragon began making soft sounds that were clearly meant for the humans on the bridge. Its scales shifted to a pattern they had seen before, the teaching pattern it had used earlier. This time, however, the message was clearer. The dragon was showing them images somehow, projecting thoughts directly into their minds. They saw stars being consumed by darkness, entire solar systems going silent, and civilizations that had existed for millions of years simply vanishing from the universe. The massive entity on Xerion 7 wasn't just a creature, it was something that existed to destroy everything else. And their rescue of the dragon had somehow awakened it from a sleep that had lasted longer than human civilization had existed. "We can't run," Lisa said finally, understanding what the dragon was trying to tell them. "If that thing gets fully free, it won't stop with one planet. It will keep going until there's nothing left." The dragon's scales brightened slightly, showing approval of her words, but then they shifted to new patterns that conveyed an even more disturbing message. The small creature was too young and too weak to stop the ancient entity alone. In the past, it had taken dozens of adult dragons working together to keep such creatures imprisoned. And this little dragon was the last of its kind. The full horror of what they faced became clear over the next 6 hours as more of the ancient entity emerged from Xerion 7's surface. What had started as massive tentacles was revealed to be only the smallest part of something that challenged the very concept of size. The creature that pulled itself from the planet's core was so large that it defied human understanding. Ben sat in the medical bay watching their rescued dragon, who had barely moved since its failed attempt to communicate with the entity. The small creature's scales remained dull gray, occasionally flickering with weak patterns of silver and blue. It was clear that the dragon was conserving its energy for something, though what that might be, Ben couldn't guess. "Any change?" Lisa asked as she entered the medical bay. "It's been like this for hours. Physically, it's healing well from the injuries, but mentally..." Ben shook his head. "I think it's carrying some kind of enormous burden. Like it knows something terrible is about to happen." On the bridge, Alex continued monitoring the situation on Xerion 7. His sensors could barely process what they were detecting. The entity emerging from the planet had revealed itself to be roughly spherical in shape, covered with thousands of tentacles that moved in hypnotic patterns. But the most disturbing aspect was how it affected the space around it. "The distortions are getting worse," Alex reported to Maria, who was trying to understand the tactical situation. "Light is bending around that thing in ways that shouldn't be possible, and the gravity effects are starting to influence other planets in the system." Maria studied the readings with growing alarm. "How is that possible? It's just one creature." "That's what I keep telling myself, but the evidence says otherwise. Whatever this thing is, it's not made of normal matter. It's like it exists partially in our universe and partially somewhere else." The dragon in the medical bay suddenly lifted its head and made a soft sound. Ben looked over to see its scales brightening slightly, shifting into the communication pattern they had learned to recognize. "Lisa, you should see this," Ben called. "I think it's trying to tell us something important." They gathered around the small creature as it began projecting images into their minds again. This time, the visions were clearer and more detailed. They saw a civilization that had existed millions of years ago, beings that looked somewhat like the dragon but much larger and more powerful. These ancient creatures had been guardians, protectors of the galaxy against threats that came from outside normal space and time. The images showed the guardians in their prime, magnificent dragons the size of starships working together to bind entities like the one now emerging from Xerion 7. They used some combination of advanced technology and natural abilities to create prisons that could hold creatures of enormous power and malevolence. But then the vision showed the decline of the guardian civilization. Wars, plagues, and natural disasters had reduced their numbers over millions of years. As fewer guardians remained to maintain the ancient prisons, some of the bound entities began to stir. The last guardians had made a desperate decision. They would sacrifice their ability to grow to full size, remaining small and weak, but able to hide and survive until they were needed again. The dragon showed them the final image, itself as a baby, placed near the crystal formation on Zerion 7 not by accident, but as a living key. Its presence near the prison had been the final element keeping the entity contained. When the humans rescued it from the collapsed crystals, they had unknowingly removed the last seal. "So it's our fault," Lisa said quietly. "We caused this by trying to help." The dragon's scales shifted to warm gold, and somehow they all understood that it held no blame for them. The humans had acted with compassion, trying to save what they thought was an injured creature. The dragon seemed to respect that even, though the consequences were potentially catastrophic. Ben knelt down beside the small creature. "What can we do? How do we fix this?" The dragon's response was complex, showing them images of the crystal formations they had seen on Zerion 7. The structures weren't just decorations or ruins. They were part of an ancient machine designed to contain the entity. The crystals could generate specific energy frequencies that disrupted the creature's ability to fully manifest in normal space. But there was a problem. The machine required enormous amounts of power to operate, far more than the dying planet could provide. In the past, adult guardian dragons had served as living power sources, channeling cosmic energies through their bodies to feed the containment system. "You're too small to power something like that alone," Maria observed, understanding the dragon's dilemma. The dragon's scales confirmed her assessment, shifting to patterns that conveyed frustration and fear. It had the knowledge to operate the ancient systems, but not the strength. And with each passing hour, the entity was becoming more active and dangerous. Alex called from the bridge with updates that made their situation even more desperate. "The thing is starting to extend its influence beyond the planet. I'm detecting gravitational anomalies throughout the system. And there's something else. Other objects in space are going dark, not exploding or being destroyed, just ceasing to exist." They returned to the bridge to find the main screen showing a view of the outer system. Several asteroids that had been visible on their sensors were now gone, leaving behind patches of absolute emptiness that hurt to look at directly. The entity wasn't just large and powerful, it was actively consuming reality itself. The dragon became increasingly agitated as it watched the display. Its scales flashed rapidly between black and red, and it made urgent chittering sounds that clearly indicated distress. "It's trying to tell us something about those dark areas," Ben observed. "I think those patches of emptiness are spreading." Alex confirmed Ben's suspicion with his sensor readings. The dark zones are expanding slowly, but steadily. At this rate, they'll reach the inner planets within days. The implications were terrifying. If the entity could consume matter and energy from a distance, there might be no safe place in the galaxy. Every world, every star, every living thing could potentially be devoured by the spreading darkness. Lisa made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Alex, how close can we get to those crystal formations without being destroyed?" "Are you insane?" Maria demanded. "That thing could crush us without even noticing we exist." "The dragon is trying to tell us something about those crystals," Lisa insisted. "Maybe there's still a way to reactivate the containment system." The dragon's scales brightened considerably at her words, shifting to patterns of hope and gratitude. It began projecting new images into their minds, showing them technical details of the crystal matrix. The ancient machine was indeed still functional, but it needed a power source and someone to operate it. Ben studied the dragon's communications carefully. "I think it's saying that any intelligent life form can potentially channel the energy needed, not just guardian dragons, but it would be extremely dangerous." The dragon confirmed his understanding, then showed them more images. The process would require multiple individuals working together, linking their minds and life forces through the dragon to power the containment system. Most would survive the experience, but there were no guarantees. Alex ran calculations based on the technical data the dragon was providing. Theoretically, it could work. The crystal formations are still mostly intact, and our ship's power systems could provide the initial energy to start the process, but we'd have to land on the planet and get within a few hundred meters of those crystals. "With that thing right there waiting for us," Maria pointed out. "It's already aware of our presence. The moment we enter the atmosphere, it will probably attack. The dragon made soft sounds that somehow conveyed reassurance. Through its mental projections, they understood that the entity was still partially bound by the failing containment system. As long as some of the crystals remained active, the creature couldn't move freely or use its full power. They would have a narrow window of opportunity to reach the crystal formations. But the window was closing rapidly. As more of the entity emerged from the planet's surface, the remaining seals grew weaker. Soon it would break free completely and become unstoppable. "How long do we have?" Lisa asked. The dragon's scales shifted to deep orange and red, universal, colors of warning and urgency. Through its projections, they saw that they had perhaps 12 hours before the final seals failed. After that, nothing in the universe would be able to stop the entity from consuming everything that existed. Lisa looked at her crew, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. They were explorers and scientists, not warriors, but they had inadvertently unleashed something that threatened all life in the galaxy. The responsibility for stopping it, or at least trying, fell to them. "Anyone who wants to leave can take the emergency shuttle," she announced. "This isn't your fault, and no one should be forced to face something like this." But nobody moved toward the shuttle bay. Ben picked up the dragon gently, and the small creature's scales brightened to warm gold. Maria checked her equipment one more time. Alex began plotting a course for the planet's surface. They were 4 humans and 1 small dragon against a cosmic horror older than their solar system. The odds were impossible, the danger was beyond calculation, and failure would mean the end of everything they had ever known. But they were going to try anyway because someone had to, and there was nobody else. The descent through Zarion 7's atmosphere felt like flying into the mouth of a nightmare. Alex gripped the shuttle controls tightly as reality twisted around them, making navigation nearly impossible. The massive entity below was warping space so severely that their instruments couldn't determine which direction was actually down. "Gravity is fluctuating wildly," Alex reported, fighting to keep the shuttle stable. One second we're being pulled toward the planet, the next we're being pushed away. Through the shuttle's windows, they could see the entity more clearly than ever before. What had seemed impossibly large from orbit was revealed to be even more monstrous up close. The creature's body stretched beyond the horizon in every direction, its surface covered with moving patterns that hurt to look at directly. Tentacles the size of mountain ranges writhed in the alien sky, blotting out the sun with their impossible darkness. Ben held the dragon carefully in his arms, feeling the small creature tremble with fear and determination. Its scales flickered between silver and deep blue, and it made soft sounds that seemed to be some kind of prayer or meditation. "How is it doing?" Maria asked, checking her equipment one final time. She had brought every weapon the ship carried, though she doubted any of them would be useful against something so vast. "Scared but focused," Ben replied. "I think it's preparing itself for what comes next." The dragon lifted its head and looked directly at Lisa, who was studying the landing zone through the front window. The crystal formations were still there, though many had been damaged by the entity's emergence. Several of the tall spires had fallen, and cracks ran through most of the remaining structures. But the dragon's projections assured them that enough of the ancient machine remained functional. "Landing zone in sight," Alex announced. "But we have a problem. Some of those tentacles are moving toward the crystal area." Lisa watched as several of the enormous appendages began reaching toward the landing site. The entity had clearly sensed their approach and was trying to prevent them from reaching the containment system. "Can you get us down before they block the way?" she asked. Alex pushed the shuttle's engines to maximum power. "Hold on to something. This is going to be rough." They dove toward the surface at dangerous speed, racing against the approaching tentacles. The shuttle shook violently as gravity waves from the entity buffeted them from all sides. Warning alarms filled the cabin as multiple systems overloaded from the stress. The dragon suddenly struggled in Ben's arms and managed to reach the shuttle's communication system. It pressed several controls with its claws, and external speakers activated. The small creature began making loud, piercing calls that echoed across the landscape below. The effect was immediate and startling. The tentacles that had been reaching for the landing zone suddenly hesitated, their movements becoming uncertain. The dragon's call seemed to confuse the entity, buying them precious seconds to complete their landing. Alex set the shuttle down hard among the crystal formations, the impact throwing everyone forward against their restraints. But they were down and still alive, which seemed like a miracle given the circumstances. "Everyone out, quickly," Lisa ordered. "We don't know how long the dragon's distraction will work." They emerged from the shuttle into an alien landscape transformed by horror. The crystal formations that had once been beautiful monuments now stood like broken teeth against a sky filled with writhing darkness. The air itself felt wrong, thick and oppressive, as if the entity's presence was changing the fundamental nature of reality. The dragon's scales had turned bright silver and it was projecting detailed images into their minds. It showed them exactly which crystals they needed to reach and how to activate the ancient containment system. The process was complex but not impossible. They would need to form a circle around the central crystal spire and link their minds together, channeling their life energy through the dragon to power the machine. There, Ben pointed to a tall, crystal formation near the center of the ruins. "That's the main control node." As they made their way through the debris, the ground began to shake. The entity had noticed their landing and was responding with increasing agitation. Tentacles as large as city blocks began slamming into the surface around them, sending shockwaves through the crystal formations. "It's trying to destroy the containment system," Maria realized. "It knows what we're attempting." The dragon made urgent chittering sounds and its scales flashed rapid patterns of red and gold. Through its mental projections, they understood that they needed to hurry. The entity was breaking free from the remaining seals faster than expected. Alex reached the central crystal first and placed his hands on its smooth surface. Nothing happened initially, but then the dragon began to glow with soft silver light. The crystal responded, pulsing with the same gentle radiance. "I can feel it," Alex said with wonder. "There's something alive in these crystals. Not conscious like us, but aware somehow." Ben and Maria took their positions around the crystal, placing their hands on different facets of its surface. Lisa held the dragon carefully, feeling its small body growing warm as it prepared to channel enormous energies through itself. The moment they completed the circle, the dragon's glow intensified dramatically. The crystal beneath their hands began to vibrate with power that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal space. Other crystals throughout the ruins started responding, their own lights flickering to life after millennia of dormancy. But the process came with a terrible cost. The energy flowing through the dragon and into the crystals was drawn directly from their life forces. Lisa felt years of her existence being pulled away, converted into the specific frequencies needed to bind the cosmic entity. The others experienced the same drain, hair turning gray, faces aging, strength flowing out of their bodies like water. The dragon bore the worst of it. The small creature's body became a conduit for forces that would have instantly destroyed any normal living thing. Its scales blazed like captured starlight as it fought to control and direct the enormous energies. The effect on the entity was immediate and violent. The massive creature let out a sound that wasn't heard so much as felt, a vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. Its tentacles writhed in obvious pain as the reactivated containment field began to take hold. "It's working," Maria gasped, her voice weak but determined. "The thing is being pulled back down." But their victory was incomplete. The entity was fighting the containment with all its ancient power, and cracks were already appearing in some of the crystals. The machine had been designed to be operated by dozens of adult guardian dragons, not 4 humans and 1 small creature working far beyond their natural limits. The dragon's projections became desperate, showing them that the current power level wasn't enough. The entity was too strong after its partial awakening, and the containment system was too damaged to hold it indefinitely. They needed more energy, more life force to complete the binding. Ben understood what the dragon was asking before the others. "It wants us to give more, everything we have." "That could kill us," Alex pointed out, though he didn't remove his hands from the crystal. Lisa looked at her crew, then at the entity thrashing against its bonds. Dark zones were still spreading through space around the planet, consuming asteroids and leaving patches of absolute nothingness. If they failed, here the cosmic horror would eventually devour not just their galaxy, but possibly every galaxy in existence. "The dragon is willing to sacrifice itself," she said quietly. "The least we can do is match that courage." One by one they nodded their agreement. They had come this far together, and they would finish it together, regardless of the personal cost. The dragon seemed to sense their decision. Its scales brightened to pure white light, and it began channeling not just their life energies but something deeper, the essential force that made them who they were. The crystal matrix responded with power that made their previous efforts seem like candle flames. The entity's struggles became more frantic as the containment field strengthened. Tentacles that had been reaching toward distant stars were pulled back toward the planet. The patches of consuming darkness began to shrink and fade. Reality itself started to heal as the cosmic horror was forced back into its ancient prison. But the strain was becoming unbearable. Alex collapsed first, his hair now completely white, his face lined with premature age. Maria followed seconds later, barely conscious but still maintaining her grip on the crystal. Ben held on longer, his medical training helping him understand what was happening to their bodies. But eventually even he couldn't continue. Only Lisa remained standing, holding the dragon as both of them blazed with borrowed starlight. The small creature was dying in her arms, its body burning out from the enormous forces flowing through it. But its eyes remained focused and determined, showing her that the process was almost complete. The final seal clicked into place with a sound like the universe itself, sighing in relief. The entity was pulled back into its dimensional prison, its tentacles disappearing beneath the planet's surface. The dark zones in space vanished, and the distortions in reality smoothed out like water returning to calm. Then the power flow stopped, and Lisa collapsed beside her unconscious crew members. The dragon lay still in her arms, its scales now dull gray and lifeless. For a terrifying moment, she thought they had succeeded only to lose their small ally in the process. But then the dragon's eyes opened and its scales flickered with the faintest hint of silver. It was alive, though barely, and it looked up at Lisa with something that might have been gratitude or possibly affection. Around them, the crystal formations continued to pulse with gentle light, maintaining the renewed prison that would hopefully hold the entity for another few million years. The ancient machine was working again, powered now by the life force they had willingly given to save the universe from an unimaginable threat. The silence that followed their victory was almost as overwhelming as the cosmic horror they had just defeated. Lisa lay among the crystal formations, holding the barely breathing dragon while her crew slowly regained consciousness around her. The ancient machine continued its work, pulsing with steady light that seemed to promise the entity would remain safely contained. Ben was the first to sit up, his movements slow and careful. The process had aged him decades in a matter of minutes, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. "Is everyone alive?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the ordeal. Alex groaned and rolled onto his side, his once dark hair now silver white. "Define alive. I feel like I've been hit by a meteor." Maria pushed herself up on her elbows, looking around at the transformed landscape. The crystal formations were still glowing, but their light was gentler now, more controlled. "Did we actually do it? Is that thing really contained?" Lisa looked down at the dragon in her arms. The small creature's breathing was shallow but steady, and its scales showed the faintest flicker of silver and gold. Through their mental link, which had grown stronger during the containment process, she could sense that the dragon was not just alive, but somehow changed by what they had accomplished together. "The prison is holding," she confirmed. "Our little friend here is exhausted, but I think it's going to be okay." As if responding to her words, the dragon opened its eyes and looked up at her. For a moment, Lisa was struck by how different those eyes seemed now. They still held the same intelligence and kindness, but there was something new there as well, a depth that spoke of ancient wisdom and cosmic responsibility. The dragon struggled to lift its head and made soft sounds that were clearly directed at each member of the crew. Through their strengthened mental connection, they all felt waves of gratitude and respect flowing from the small creature. It was thanking them, but more than that, it was acknowledging them as equals in what they had accomplished. "I don't think it's just a baby anymore," Ben observed, studying the dragon's behavior. Something changed during the containment process. The dragon confirmed his observation by slowly climbing out of Lisa's arms and standing on its own feet. Though its body was still small, its movements now carried a grace and confidence that hadn't been there before. Its scales began displaying complex patterns that somehow conveyed concepts too large for simple words. Through the mental images it projected, they understood what had happened. The process of channeling cosmic energies through its body had awakened dormant aspects of its guardian heritage. While it remained physically young, it now carried the knowledge and memories of its ancestors. It had become what it was always meant to be, a true protector of the galaxy. But the dragon wasn't the only one who had been changed by their experience. As the crew gathered their strength to return to the shuttle, they discovered that their forced aging hadn't been entirely negative. Along with the gray hair and lined faces, they had gained something unexpected: enhanced perception and understanding. Alex found he could sense the flow of energy through the crystal formations, understanding instinctively how the ancient containment system functioned. Maria discovered she could feel disturbances in space-time, making her aware of threats and anomalies across vast distances. Ben's medical knowledge had expanded to include biological processes he had never studied, as if the universe itself had shared its secrets with him. Lisa's changes were perhaps the most significant. She found herself connected not just to the dragon, but to a vast network of information that spanned the galaxy. She could sense other guardian creatures in distant star systems, most of them sleeping but some beginning to stir as news of their victory spread through channels that existed beyond normal communication. "We're not the same people who landed here," she said, as they made their way back to the shuttle. "Any of us." The dragon made sounds of agreement and projected new images into their minds. It showed them visions of the galaxy as it truly was. Not just stars and planets, but a living system protected by ancient guardians and cosmic defenders. The entity they had just contained was not unique. There were others sleeping in prisons throughout space, held in check by creatures like their dragon companion. "Are you saying there are more of those things out there?" Maria asked with obvious concern. The dragon's response was complex, showing them images of both threats and protectors. Yes, there were other cosmic entities bound in prisons across the galaxy, but there were also guardians watching over them. The defeat of this particular entity had sent a signal to other sleeping protectors, reminding them of their duties and strengthening their resolve. But perhaps most importantly, the dragon showed them that they had proved something significant. Humans, despite being a young species with no special powers or cosmic heritage, had demonstrated the courage and determination needed to stand against ultimate evil. They had willingly sacrificed their own life force to protect others, showing a nobility that impressed even the ancient guardians. As they reached the shuttle, the dragon made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of preparing to return to its lonely vigil among the crystal formations, it climbed into the shuttle with them and settled comfortably in the passenger area. "I think it wants to come with us," Ben said with amazement. The dragon's scales brightened to warm gold, and its mental projections confirmed Ben's assessment. The ancient containment system was now stable and would continue operating for millennia without requiring direct supervision. The dragon had fulfilled its hereditary duty, but it had also found something new: a family among the humans who had risked everything to help it complete its mission. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked the dragon directly. "This is a big galaxy, and we're just explorers. We can't offer you the kind of cosmic purpose you were bred for." The dragon's response came in the form of gentle amusement and affection. Through their mental link, it showed them that cosmic purpose was exactly what it had found with them. They had proved themselves capable of facing impossible odds and making ultimate sacrifices for the greater good. In a universe full of ancient guardians and sleeping protectors, they were something new and valuable. Ordinary beings who chose to be extraordinary when it mattered most. The return journey to their main ship was quiet, each of them processing what had happened and what it meant for their futures. They had aged decades in a single day, gained abilities they didn't fully understand, and formed a bond with a creature that represented one of the universe's oldest and most important responsibilities. But perhaps most significantly, they had proved something about humanity that even they hadn't fully understood before. When faced with cosmic horror beyond imagination, their first instinct hadn't been to run or hide. They had chosen compassion over fear, sacrifice over safety, and unity over individual survival. Alex was the first to voice what they were all thinking. So what do we do now? We can't exactly go back to routine exploration after this. Lisa looked at the dragon, who was contentedly grooming its scales in a patch of artificial sunlight from the ship's environmental systems. The small creature looked up at her with ancient eyes and a young face, and through their bond, she felt its gentle encouragement. I think we continue exploring, she said finally. But maybe we keep our eyes open for other situations where ordinary people need to do extraordinary things. The galaxy is a big place, and if there are more sleeping horrors out there are probably other guardians who could use some help. The dragon's scales flashed approval, and it made sounds that were clearly expressions of joy. It had found not just allies in its cosmic duties, but friends who understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought not by legendary heroes, but by people who simply refused to walk away when others needed help. Maria smiled, the expression looking strange on her prematurely aged face but somehow more genuine than any smile she had worn before. So we're what? Cosmic troubleshooters now? Flying around the galaxy looking for ancient evils to fight and baby dragons to rescue? Stranger things have happened, Ben pointed out, and we're probably better qualified for it now than most people. As their ship resumed course toward their original destination, they began receiving messages from other vessels in the area. Word of the gravitational anomalies around Zarian 7 had spread, and several scientific expeditions were requesting permission to study the area. Lisa made a decision that would have consequences for decades to come. Instead of filing a standard report about their discoveries, she chose to tell the truth, all of it. The cosmic entity, the guardian dragon, the ancient containment systems, and humanity's role in preventing a universal catastrophe. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some people dismissed their report as fiction or madness, but others recognized the truth in their words. Scientists, explorers, and even government officials began reaching out, wanting to know more about the hidden realities of the galaxy and humanity's place within them. Within months, a new organization had formed around their small crew, the Guardian Initiative, dedicated to locating and protecting the ancient defense systems that kept cosmic horrors contained. The dragon, who had grown larger and more confident as it adjusted to life among humans, became both a symbol and a teacher for the new group. But for Lisa and her original crew, the most important change was simpler and more personal. They had found their true purpose in the vast galaxy, not as mere explorers or scientists, but as protectors and guardians in their own right. And sometimes, late at night during long voyages between star systems, Lisa would sit with the dragon, as it showed her visions of the galaxy's hidden wonders and ancient mysteries. In those moments, she understood that their adventure had been just the beginning. The universe was full of sleeping guardians, imprisoned horrors, and ordinary people, who might one day be called upon to do extraordinary things. They had saved a baby dragon and discovered that beneath the surface of their reality lay wonders and terrors beyond imagination. But more importantly, they had learned that courage and compassion could triumph over even cosmic evil, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply refusing to abandon those who needed help. The dragon, no longer alone in its ancient duties, purred contentedly as their ship sailed between the stars, ready for whatever challenges awaited them in the vast darkness of space.